Welcome to Points to Ponder. My guest today is my good friend, Renee Kessler. Renee, would you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am a associate minister at Mount Calvary Baptist Church right here in East Knoxville. I am here at the Beck Culture Exchange Center, where I am the president of the Beck Culture Exchange Center. And I live in East Knoxville, so I live, work, play, and go to church here. And I'm a native Knoxvillian, born and raised.
So, Renee, we've been doing this series on different kinds of justice, and our theme for this week is racial justice, a point about racial justice. And the point that I used is a quote from Martin Luther King. The quote is this: "No one is free until we are all free." And I wonder if you could just talk a bit about your experience related to that quote.
Yeah. Well, obviously, so many people, I know you attributed the quote to Dr. King. They talk about Fannie Lou Hamer, different people who have experienced some verbiage or some form of that quote. And I think the reality of it is, the truth is, whoever coined the phrase, the intention was that I can never be great until you're great. And until we come to that reckoning point where I'm only as good as I can be when you're as good as you can be good. And I don't know that people I don't know what situation has to occur to get people to that kind of thinking. For those of us who have been oppressed, or those of us who have been in challenging situations, I think we come to that epiphany sooner, perhaps, than those who have not had those experiences. So I think my hope is that what that means for us and what it's meant for me in my life is that I strive to be the best person that I can be. Because if I am the best person, if I'm a light in a dark world, then I hope that light sheds light on darkness for other people. And there's a desire for all of us to want to be better, because at the end of the day, I think it's our responsibility to leave the world better than we found it. And I think the only way we can do that is to truly embrace one another and appreciate each other's point of view or vantage point. So you can't walk in my shoes and I can't walk in yours, but I can appreciate and understand your story. I can appreciate and understand your journey and your experiences in such a way that I can say, I want to live in a world where everyone has the same rights and privileges as the next person, because that's going to make me better. When you can come to that realization that I'm really not free, though I may feel like it may look like it, and even my privileges may say that I am, I'm still being stifled because I haven't had the privilege of meeting Renee Kessler. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. or the opening my world to other people. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And their opportunity to be great. There's an African proverb that says, when you take the elevator to the top floor, don't forget to send it back down so someone else can ride up. I think we're always beholden to each other. It's never going to be good enough for me to be there if you're not there. Mm-hmm. It's never going to be great if I haven't reached back to serve and to help someone else along the way. So I think that's what it means. It means that we send the elevator back down so we all get a chance to go up.
Mm-hmm. You were talking about privilege, and I think that is certainly a concept that is just beginning to be recognized better by some white people. Some white people have trouble understanding white privilege, especially people who are poor white people and haven't been as privileged, that perhaps white advantage might be a way of helping people who don't feel privileged to understand. Can you give some examples of what white advantage looks like?
I'll do something silly because I think, whatever you want to call it, whatever helps you to digest it, I think I'm okay with that because we have these wordsmiths things about life in general, and we keep coming to full fruition what we should call ourselves or not call ourselves. So I think whatever you feel comfortable with, understanding the reality of it is. I'll just use a few examples. When you go to the hotel room, and you mentioned about my hair when we came on, we were having our small talk. And I'm on vacation with my family, and we're going to the pool and different things, and we've got chlorine in our hair, and now we want to wash our hair and make it better. That shampoo is not for me. That's so silly. But it's not for me. I don't use that shampoo. That's going to dry my hair out. Mm-hmm. We have natural hair, but it was not intended for me. Mm-hmm. But your hair, it is intended for. When I grew up, I remember I would have to go to a specific store to find a pantyhose that matched my skin. But it didn't matter what store I went to, there was one that matched yours. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And silly things like the Band-Aids, right? Mm-hmm. That match and blend in with your color, but not my color. So I think whether you call it advantage or whether you call it privileges, and those are frivolous things and items, but they're intentional in engaging me. They're intentional or not, or unintentional, but they are not with me as a thought. Right. And when we start doing things, and that's where the advantage or the privilege comes in, because that skin tone affords that. Mm-hmm. And that's very small and it's very simple. But that's the kind of thing that I wanted to be able to share with you that you can touch and see and maybe connect with me with before we can get to bigger things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important because I don't think the bigger things can be heard till you realize that. And I think you're right. I know a lot of times it is intentional. Sometimes it is unintentional. But even when it's unintentional, it betrays a thought that the norm is this, mm-hmm. which I think then begins to move us into a discussion of systemic racism. Let's begin to talk a little bit about systemic racism and what that is. Maybe you could define it first.
I can't because systemic racism is so big. And it's not only those legislative acts, laws that have been enacted since the foundation of this country with respect to slave labor and all of those kinds of things that have gone through. I think the 1619 Project has done a great job, if you've ever seen that or read through that with the New York Times, of really highlighting the 400-year history that's been embedded into our system with systemic racism. For those of us who are Black, we see it, we feel racism. And the feelings that you get, sometimes you can't always identify what that is. You can't even articulate it or quantify it, but you felt it when it came across. You felt it when it hit you. But it is a system, a caste system that's set up in such a way that it's so embedded in the fabric of our country and in of our laws and of our economics and families and all of these kinds of things that it plays itself out almost without even noticeability. Mm-hmm. So if I start to define it, then I'm going to be here for a long time. But let's just say this, it's real. Mm-hmm. And until we begin to break it down at every level, then I think that we just assume it's not real or that it's not as bad as we think it is. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's worse in these moments because we think we've gotten over some things. And so we begin to get comfortable. We think, oh, well, we don't have, separate and unequal or separate and equal anymore. Or we don't have this, that, Black folks can vote now. We have all of these kinds of things. So we think we don't have an issue anymore. We had a Black president, you get that. Mm-hmm. So you get all of these things. And so then I think you get this, if you're not careful, we get comfortable into believing that it doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. And that comfort sometimes will allow us or prevent us, if you will, from making further progress and really dealing with an issue that haunts us. And it didn't come overnight, so it's not going to go away overnight.
Right, right. What do you think would help move us forward?
Well, as a believer in Jesus Christ, I'll always go first to those of us who are Christians, those of us who are believers of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I think if we did our part to live the love that Christ lived, the mandate that Christ gave to each of us to first love the Lord your God with all your heart, and then to love your neighbor as unto yourself. I think that is the simplest answer. And I think we can be that. We can be the model of what that looks like, and just, recognize at every level that our intention is to exude the life of Christ and his love that he had for all people. We know that racism was real in the Bible. And we know that Christ encountered that, and people wanted to know how he dealt with that, even with women, all kinds of issues. And he put himself at the forefront. And in those situations, he showed the genuine love for people. He showed the genuine concern and compassion for all people, irrespective of person. And I think that that's the first thing that we as believers can do. And I think that's the spiritual part. That's the biggest part, our prayer, our life, and the way we live. Now, I think it's also incumbent upon us not only to be better, to live better and to live like Christ, but then to tell other people, because the Great Commission was to go out and tell the world. So we're supposed to be out there fighting the good fight, right? Seeing injustices and calling it what it is, and then being courageous and bold enough to stand on the side of right, even when it's not popular. I think that's important. And then I think each person within their own spaces has an opportunity every day to do something different than the next person. And if nothing else, I ask people all the time, look at your dinner tables, look at your friendship circles, look at your conversations. If everybody in your circle, everybody that you text, everybody that you talk to on a daily basis, y'all all look alike and you all live in the same places and spaces, then you haven't opened your heart or your door to the possibilities of more friendships and more relationships. And I don't think you can truly know a person until you know a person. And so, and then therefore I can't appreciate maybe some of the issues that I have until I understand some other sides of that issue. So I think that's some of the things we can do, but really studying and learning history, and not just because I'm here at Beck, but I am learning a new appreciation for history and being able to go back and really look at how this system, how this country was made. And, what were some of the things, because there are some things, some atrocities that you will read, we did that? That happened? And I think that sets the platform for where we might be today. So at Beck, when we talk about local and regional African-American history, we tell the story of what happened right here in Knoxville. And the reason that's important, Pastor, is because the temperature and the climate in every community is going to be a little bit different. All Black people aren't the same. All white people aren't the same. We're all different and we have different experiences. We have some of the cultural things that are dynamics that are there, but within every geography, the temperature is going to be different based on what the background of that history of that community was. So Knoxville has its own background and history. And so Beck tells the local and the regional story of Black history and culture so that you can understand what was happening in Knoxville. So you've got the world stage, right? And you got things happening across the country with respect to race relations and all of those things. But within itself, Knoxville had its own issues. What was happening and what did people see? And the reason that's important is because we're only a couple of generations from that. And those generations have taught us, right? Those lessons, those histories, those things. And some of what we have in us is based on what our families have shared with us and told us from their experiences. And vice versa, your families that were here in Knoxville have shared things with you. So then you begin to understand, maybe that's why this is that way or whatever. You have a better understanding of some background of what happens here.
And I think that is one of the most important things, because the way history gets told is not always the same. And one of the things I think that a big thing here in Knoxville was the whole thing about urbanization and questions of gentrification
So for people who don't know, urban renewal, which many Black people will call urban removal because it almost literally wiped out the Black community, or Negro removal. In Knoxville, it's going to happen from 1959 to 1974. And it's really as a result of a federal act, the Housing and Urban Development HUD Title I Act, which was supposed to go into urban communities and remove blight and slum. So at the core of the act was to remove blight and slum and to clear out some of the issues that were happening in many of our urban communities. And it wasn't unique to Knoxville, so it's going to happen all over the country. What's interesting is the whole idea was that it would come in and clear this blight and slum. And we like to say, but the wrecking ball went too far because it took the good, the bad, and everything else. So it went under that auspices, but we know more than that happened. And here's what's the reality of that in Knoxville. Now, I said that urban renewal started from 1959 to 1974. And someone corrected me and said, "You're wrong." And I said, "What do you mean I'm wrong? That's what it says." And they said, "No, that is not when urban renewal started in Knoxville." They said the first building was torn down in the Black community in 1959, but that is not when urban renewal started. The Act of 1949 was signed in 1941, Title I Housing Act. And literally, from the time the act was signed, that's when urban renewal started. And so long before the first building came down in the Black community, church or school or house, the psyche or the mindset of the Black people were torn down. Because as soon as they heard that the government had signed into law this sort of eminent domain where they could come in and take your property, fear gripped the community. So long before the first physical building comes down, the spiritual, mental soul gets broken down. And that's the problem with urban renewal or gentrification. It's like you break down the spirit of a people. Something's about to happen and I can't stop it. Something's about to get taken and I can't. For example, there's a school called High School Elementary School, goes to sixth grade before urban renewal. 1949, that school goes to sixth grade, Black school for Black children. After 1950, when those children in the sixth grade graduate, the next year, the school will go to the fifth grade. They won't replace the sixth grade. Mm-hmm. The next year, it'll go to the fourth grade. They won't replace the fifth grade. The third grade, until there's just one school class left in that elementary school. The kids are nervous. What's happening to my school? What's about to take place? What's going on? And there's fear. What's happening to my community? And all of a sudden, now the building's gone. So urban renewal oftentimes is not just about taking away physical structures, but it's about taking away a community of pride, resilience of people, and it's about breaking that down. It's always, when you talk about gentrification or urban renewal or whatever it is you want to call, when it disproportionately affects a disadvantaged community and displaces them, that's a problem, right? It's one thing to come in and revitalize the community. And there were some blighted slum areas that really needed attention, no doubt. There were issues that had issues. There were communities that had issues. But we know the Carnegie Library was not blight and slum. We know Dr. James H. Presnell's mansion was not blight and slum. We know that in urban renewal in Knoxville, 107 African-American businesses were taken, 15 churches, and almost 3,000 homes, the majority of which were for Black folks. That's a whole community. And so now what? Now where do we go? Thank goodness the Black Culture Exchange Center will come along as a result of that to preserve and conserve that history. But the idea is that we have to stop tearing down and taking away. I'll use one final example with urban renewal. A few years ago, we were talking about tearing down the Civic Coliseum. A lot of people said, well, you know, we've got the convention center now and we don't really need the Civic Coliseum. And they asked me, how do you feel, Renee, about the Civic Coliseum coming down? And I said to them, yes, we have that we have the new convention center, and that's very nice and that's very good. I said, but I want you to understand, we are now talking some 50 years later about tearing down the convention center. 72 homes, 9 businesses, and 2 churches were torn down just to build the Civic Coliseum. I said, so regardless of whether you think we should take it down or whether we should keep it, I want you to understand what got torn down and what got ripped out to build it, because we just keep repeating it over and over because we haven't learned.
Mm. You know what it makes me think of, the scripture passage that called this point to mind for me is in Luke, because Sunday is St. Luke's Sunday, and it's in the 4th chapter, and it's right at the first where Jesus is beginning his ministry, and he takes out the scroll of Isaiah. So Luke 4:18 and 19, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And, in addition to the fact that, we're talking on all levels, physical, spiritual, relational, societal, cultural, religious, everything about what needs to be set free and blind. But I think the one thing in there that really captures me is that at the end of that, he says, this is the time now. And so I wonder if you could end by just telling me, this is the time now for what?
There's nothing new under the sun. Everything in life that's happened has already happened before. We've already had a health pandemic with the Spanish flu in 1918 that will go all the way through 1919 into 1920. And at the exact same time, we were having a racial pandemic in 1919. In fact, the year 1919 is going to be the most volatile year in this country's history with respect to race riots. The summer of 1919 was so bad that they termed it the heat of a red summer. The red summer was literally the bloodshed that so many Black people endured as a result of race riots all over this country, and Knoxville became one of the red summer cities. So in that year, you have a health pandemic, the Spanish flu, you have a racial pandemic, a double pandemic, and here we are in 2020, finding ourselves in the middle of a health pandemic, COVID-19, and a racial pandemic of epic proportion size, which started out, it feels like, with our exposure to George Floyd. And I think that when I say this is the moment, we didn't learn from history. We didn't learn from 1919. We missed it again. So we've got to go back and revisit what happened. Why did it happen? And what should we have done differently? Because we're in a moment right now where we can do something different. We're in a moment right now where we don't have to talk about this again repeating itself, because we've learned some things. And so I believe by faith that this moment calls for those of us who believe that Christ on that occasion preached what was the mission of his life for the time that he was here and what he did. It's time for us to live out that creed. It is the moment for us to say, this is enough. There's some recordings of some former emancipated enslaved people who they did a recording back in the 40s. And they actually talked to some of these people who were still alive, many of these Black people who had been emancipated that were still alive. There was a white reporter, and he was interviewing them in the 40s. And before he set the stage for the interview, and he would say to the elderly emancipated Black person, he would say to them right before the interview, listen, let me tell you who I am. He would say, I want you to know that I'm a different kind of white man. I'm not like, other white men. He said, I'm a different kind of white man. He said, I believe that Black people should be able to vote. I believe that Black people should be able to go to whatever schools they want to go to. I believe that Black people should be able to do whatever they're qualified to do. I'm a different white man. And this elderly 100-year-old Black man, emancipated from slavery, he says, son, you still got the disease. Mm. I know you think you're cured. He said, but you still have the disease. He said, you can't give me the right to be a human being. Only God can give me that right. You can't give me the right to be anything. I was born with that right just like you. He said, now you can take that right from me. If you have all the policemen on your side and all the jobs on your side, you can take the right from me, but you can't give me the right. I was born with it. So I think it's very important that we understand that we were all born with the inalienable right to be human beings. And as such, it is incumbent upon all of us to recognize that. And when we do, we treat each other as the equals that we really are. You can't give me that right. But then you recognize when you're taking that right away from me. St. Luke's was founded in 1936, right? Mm-hmm. 1936. We talk about Black people driving. Today, I do a class with the University of Tennessee, nursing students, and they come here and we do a class called White Privilege. And 90% of the nursing students that come here are white female, right? About 100 students, 90% are white female. The other 10% are people of color or males, but predominantly white females. And so we get to be totally honest about whatever it is that they're feeling. It's a safe space to share out. One of the nursing students was sharing a story. And she talked about how her sister's best friend is a Black male. And so she shared this story about how he has a 3-year-old son. And she shared how when he gets in the car, he puts the 3-year-old in the back seat, in the car seat. He locks him in. He gets in the front seat. And then he takes his wallet out of his pocket and he lays it up on top of the dashboard. He says, okay, son, when you get in the car, take your wallet out, lay it on the dashboard. And then he says, now open it up, get your ID, and you leave that here. And he starts laying all these things out. And you keep both hands on the steering wheel. And if a police officer pulls you over, do not move your hands from the steering wheel. You ask the police officer, can I reach and get my ID, which is where he can see it. He said, and you do all of this. And so as she's telling the story, she begins to cry. And tears envelop, and she gets emotional trying to tell a story. She said, because she's thinking about this Black man who goes through this every time he gets in the car, right? And this is in 2017 when we're doing this particular class. And she says, he thinks about this. She said, and then further, she said, what's worse and what's sad about it is that he's teaching it to a 3-year-old, in the back seat, that he's going to have to do that. She said, and I thought about myself, white privilege. I thought about myself when I get pulled over by a police officer. She says, I'm like this in my pocketbook, jumping in the back seat, throwing everything out, trying to get to my ID. And she said, it suddenly dawned on me, he can't do that. And I said to her, 1936, Victor Hugo Green writes a book called The Green Negro Motorist Book from 1936 to 1964. And in the book, around the first few pages, this is when Black people began to own their own cars and they were driving across country. But they needed to know where they could go. They needed to know where safe spaces were. And I said, and he wrote a book. And at the beginning of the book, he would say things like a list of the driving rules of the road. Don't drive too fast. Don't cross over the line. Keep your hands on the steering wheels. Don't get too close up on another car. In other words, he was saying, don't do anything to draw attention to yourself that would cause you to get pulled over. Because in 1936, if a Black family or a Black man is pulled over, they may never be heard of again. And I said to her, here we are in 2017, still talking about safe driving rules of the road. Because we don't know history. And Victor Hugo Green said, I truly hope I'm writing a book that will one day, starting a business that will one day be out of business, that Black people will never need a book to tell them where to go or to get them home safely.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking so much time with me.
I'm honored.